A single gunshot echoes from the direction of the barn. One sound. Then silence. On the high desert plain, the night wind moves through the dry grass like something breathing. The western mountains stand black against a sky burning with stars. A wooden cabin. One east-facing window still holding the faintest amber of lamplight. Inside, on a worn table, a glass of rye sits freshly poured. An old photograph rests beside it. A man sits there, calloused hands gripping the arms of his chair, ears straining toward something in the dark. Someone is bleeding in his barn. A woman, a stranger, wounded, carrying something worth killing for. For 4 years, he has spoken to no one but his horse. For 10 years, he has been running from a name he buried in the ashes of a burning village. For 11 days, he has counted the silence like a man counts his own heartbeats. And tonight, the silence is about to break wide open. Orrin Calloway had not spoken a full sentence out loud in 11 days. He knew this because he counted not on purpose. The counting just happened, the way breathing happens, the way the ache in his right knee happens every morning, when the cold comes in under the door. He would notice the silence, and then he would count backward, and then he would arrive at the last real conversation he'd had, which was with the feed store clerk in Mallow Creek, who asked if he wanted the 50-pound sack or the 100, and Orrin had said the 50, and that was it. 11 days, not that it bothered him, it didn't bother him. The cabin was 14 by 16 feet. He knew this because he had built it himself, 4 years ago, in the autumn after Clara died, driving each nail with the focused attention of a man who needed something to hit. 14 by 16. One window facing east, one door. A stone hearth that drew well in dry weather and sulked in wet. A shelf of books he had read so many times, the spines were soft as cloth. A table. 2 chairs. He had never moved the second chair. He told himself this was practical. It was a chair. Chairs had a function. Moving it would have been a statement, and Orrin Calloway did not make statements. He was not that kind of man. Clara had been that kind of man. Woman. Clara had been the one who said things plainly, who named what was happening in a room before anyone else had even identified it as a thing. She could walk into a silence and tell you exactly what kind it was. Comfortable or dangerous, grieving or angry. She read silences the way Orrin read terrain. He missed her with a steadiness that had long since passed through anguish and arrived somewhere flatter, drier, the way a riverbed looks after years without rain. The shape of water still there, the water gone, and Eli was different. Eli was the one he didn't let himself think about directly. He circled that grief the way you circle a fire you're not sure is safe, close enough to feel the heat, far enough to not catch. Ellie had died in September of 1864, 19 years old. Outside Petersburg, Virginia, in the mud and smoke of a war that had already lasted longer than anyone had predicted, and would last a little longer still. A private wrote to Orrin afterward. Said Eli had been brave. They always said brave. Orrin had read the word and set the letter down and gone outside and stood in the yard for a long time, looking at nothing. 10 years ago, it still felt like something that happened to a different man. A man Orrin used to be, before he learned that the world no particular interest in fairness, and before he moved himself to a 14 by 16 cabin at the edge of nothing, and before he started counting the days between conversations without meaning to. He had been a different man then. Younger in ways that had nothing to do with age. He'd had 11 years in the Army as a scout, tracking, reading, moving through dangerous country, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to make himself invisible. The skills were still in him. They hadn't gone anywhere. They'd just gone quiet, the way a river goes quiet in a drought. The shape still there, the current waiting. He had a horse named Duster. Gray, stubborn, with the kind of loyalty that doesn't announce itself. He talked to Duster more than he talked to anyone. Short sentences. Observations about the weather. Occasional assessments of the south pasture fence, which had been requiring his attention for 3 weeks and getting it only sporadically. The feed store clerk in Mallow Creek had asked about 50 pounds or 100. Orrin had said 50, 11 days ago. He went to town once a month, sometimes less. The people there had stopped trying to draw him out years ago, which suited everyone. He paid his debts. He tipped his hat. He didn't linger. Back at the ranch, he tended his small herd, mended fences, chopped wood, and read by the fire in the evenings. History, mostly a few novels Clara had loved, that he couldn't bring himself to give away. Sometimes he stood at the east window and watched the darkness outside for a long time without moving. He was not sure what he was looking for. He had learned not to ask the question too directly. This was his life. It had the virtues of simplicity and the costs of simplicity in roughly equal measure, and he had decided some time ago that this was acceptable. The bottle of rye was 3/4 full. He was not a drinking man, not in the way that word usually meant. He didn't drink to disappear. He drank once a year on this specific night because it was September the 19th, and that was the date on the private's letter. And he had decided in year 1 that he would mark it somehow, and the rye was what he'd settled on. He poured 1 glass. He set the old photograph on the table beside it. Clara had taken it to a portrait man in Santa Fe the summer Eli turned 16. She'd saved for 3 months, called it a foolish expense, and done it anyway. In the photograph, Eli was standing straight and uncomfortable in his good shirt, the way young men stand when they are not sure what to do with their arms. Clara was beside him, her hand on his shoulder, and she was not looking at the camera. She was looking at the boy, the way she looked at him. Orrin picked up the glass, set it down, picked it up again. 19, he said out loud. His own voice surprised him a little. Rough, underused. The voice of a man who had been rationing words for years and wasn't entirely sure what to do with the surplus. You were 19, he drank. Outside, the wind moved through the scrub grass with a sound like something breathing. The mountains to the west were a dark shape against a darker sky. Stars, lots of them. The kind of sky you only get when you are far enough from other people that their lights don't interfere. Orrin had chosen this place partly for that. The quiet, the distance, the particular quality of being alone, when alone is something you've decided, rather than something that's happened to you. Or so he told himself. Somewhere in the last 4 years, that distinction had blurred considerably, but he preferred not to examine that too directly. He looked at the photograph. He looked at Clara's hand on Eli's shoulder. He thought about the way she always knew exactly where to put her hand, on exactly the right shoulder, at exactly the right moment. She had a gift for it, the instinct for presence, for being in the right place. He had been trying to remember that instinct for 4 years. He reached for the bottle, and that was when he heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong. A sound from the direction of the barn that had a quality he couldn't immediately name, except that it was out of place. Not the horses, not the cattle. The horses made one kind of sound, and the cattle made another, and Orrin knew both of those sounds, the way he knew his own heartbeat. They lived in him as a baseline, constant, and when they changed, he felt it before he registered it consciously. This was different, not animal, not weather. Something else. He sat very still for 3 seconds. Old habit. You don't move toward a sound until you've listened long enough to understand what kind of sound it is. Most people's instinct is to go immediately. Orrin had learned, over years in dangerous country, that the instinct was wrong. 3 seconds of stillness costs you nothing. It earns you information. The sound didn't repeat, which told him something. An animal would have made the sound again. Wind repeats itself in patterns. What didn't repeat was a person who had heard the silence and was now holding very still, hoping they hadn't been detected. He set the glass down. He stood. He reached for the Winchester, leaning against the wall beside the hearth. He checked it in the dark by feel, the way he'd done 10,000 times. Chamber full. Action smooth. He didn't light the lantern. Light announces you. He went out the back door. The night air was cold and clean. October was 2 weeks away, and the high desert was already practicing for it. Dropping temperature after sundown with the abruptness of a door slamming. Oren moved along the side of the cabin, staying close to the wall, his boots quiet on the packed dirt. Not silent. You can't be fully silent on packed earth. But quiet in the specific way of someone who has practiced not being heard. The barn door was closed. Nothing visible from outside. No light. No movement in the shadows. He stopped, listened there. A sound, very faint. Something between a breath and a word. Human, definitely human. And in pain, or close enough to pain, that the difference was academic. Coming from inside, he put his hand on the latch. Opened the door slow. An inch. 2 inches. He waited, one hand on the door, one on the rifle, his body against the wall where no light could silhouette him. Nothing came through the opening. He opened it wider. The barn was dark except for the thin blade of moonlight cutting through the gap in the roof boards. And the horses were standing at the far end of both stalls, with their ears up and their weight shifted back, which meant they'd been aware of something in here for a while, and had decided on stillness as their response. Smart animals, Oren let his eyes adjust. This took longer than it used to. He noted this without comment, the way you note things about your own body that have changed. Not with alarm, just with the acknowledgement that adaptation is required. The moonlight fell across the floor of the barn, across the loose hay in the corner by the tack wall, and across the raven dark hair that spread across that hay like something spilled. He crossed the barn in 8 steps, crouching as he went, rifle up, because whoever this was, they were either unconscious or very good at pretending. And he'd learned not to bet his life on the first option. He stopped 2 feet away, a woman, face down, one arm extended in front of her, as though she'd been reaching for something when she fell. The water bucket, maybe, or the stall gate, or just the empty air, as people reach when they are at the limit of what the body can do. Her clothing was Apache. He recognized the cut of it immediately, the type of leather, the specific beadwork pattern. He knew Apache work. He'd spent enough years in this territory to know the difference between nations, between regions, between the work of one woman's hands and another's. This was Jicarilla work, Northern Territory. He touched 2 fingers to the side of her throat. The pulse was there, weak, irregular in a way that had its own kind of urgency, the stuttering rhythm of a body that has been running too long on too little. Not dying in the next minute, but not stable either. Moving in a direction that required intervention. He set the Winchester down within arm's reach and turned her carefully onto her back, and in the thin light from above he could see the extent of it. A gunshot wound in her side, the bandaging crude and entirely soaked through. The wound was old. 3 days at minimum, possibly 4. The skin around it had gone past red into the specific dark coloration that meant the fight happening inside her body was progressing in the wrong direction. She was burning up. He could feel the heat of her before he touched her. Fever that high was doing its own damage, separate from the wound, compounding it. He stood. He looked down at this stranger in his barn, at the fever and the blood, and the weaponized stillness of a person who had pushed past every reasonable limit just to get here. To his barn, in his valley. Miles from anything, someone had brought her this far, or she had brought herself. And the fact of her being here, the specific fact of a wounded Apache woman appearing in his barn at night, was not a coincidence, was not random, was the result of a series of decisions and events, and circumstances that he did not yet understand and that would, he recognized with the cold clarity of experience, complicate his life considerably. He thought about the trouble this would bring. He thought about it clearly and honestly, because he was a man who dealt in clear and honest assessments and saw no value in pretending otherwise. An Apache woman. Wounded. Hiding. Someone had put that wound in her and someone was likely looking for her, and taking her inside would make him a part of whatever she was running from. He thought about all of this. He thought about it for approximately 4 seconds, and then he picked her up. She was lighter than she should have been. That was the first thing. The alarming specificity, how much a Bella would be able to loses, when it has been doing what hers had been doing, running, hiding, bleeding, fighting a fever, refusing to stop, surviving at the expense of everything else that wasn't strictly survival. The walk to the cabin felt long, not because it was far, 20 yards, no more, but because of what he was carrying and what it meant. He laid her on his cot, the only cot. He didn't think about this. He got the lantern going and got a look at her properly, and what he saw in that light made something in his chest go slow and deliberate and cold. The face first. He couldn't help it. He was human. Even pale, even emptied by blood loss and fever, it had a quality that stopped him for a moment. High cheekbones, strong jaw. The kind of structural dignity that doesn't relax even in unconsciousness, as though her bones had decided to hold their ground, even when the rest of her couldn't. He registered this and moved on. There was work to do. The gunshot wound first. He cut away the old bandaging with his skinning knife, working carefully. Cleaned it with carbolic soap from the tin he kept on the shelf, working methodically, his hands doing the thing they knew how to do. While his mind took in information, the wound was serious. Not necessarily fatal, not yet, not if he was fast and clean about this. But it had been left too long, and there was infection taking hold, and the fever was already doing work he would need to counteract. And all of this together was a narrowing window. He worked, he boiled water, tore strips from the cleanest shirt he owned, a white one Clara had given him years ago, that he'd never worn because he didn't have occasion, and he thought briefly that she would have found this funny, the occasion finally arriving like this after all that time, and he bandaged the wound tight and proper. Then he looked at her arm. He almost missed it. The lantern light caught it at an angle. He leaned closer, and then he went very still, a burn mark on the inside of her forearm, not an accident, not a wound from any fight, deliberate, shaped, made with intention and time, the kind of mark that requires someone to hold a piece of heated metal against pressure long enough to leave a permanent impression, long enough for the person being marked to have the opportunity to stop it. She had not stopped it, or could not. Either way, he had seen burns like this before. He had seen them on cattle. The shape was a stylized letter. He had to look at it twice to be sure, turning the arm slightly in the lamplight. A capital letter A, and inside it, below the crossbar, a small horizontal line that made it something more specific than just a letter. An identifier, a brand, the kind used by an organization that wanted its marks to be permanently and unambiguously recognized. He sat back. He looked at the woman on his cot, at the fever and the bandaged wound, and the mark on her arm that someone had put there on purpose, with tools, with deliberation. Whoever had done this had been asking her something. The brand was not punishment. Punishment would be random, would be different. This was specific, organizational, a way of saying, you belong to us now, you are documented, you are marked. And she had not answered whatever they were asking, because if she had answered, she would not have needed to run. She would not be here. What you do with pain can tell you everything about a person. This woman had chosen silence. Oren looked at the burn for a long moment longer. Then he covered her arm with the blanket gently and went to stoke the fire higher. The fever needed sweat and heat and time. He would give her all three. He did not sleep that first night. He sat in the wooden chair beside the cot with the Winchester across his knees, and he watched her breathe. And he listened to the dark outside with the particular quality of attention that his years as a scout had built into him so deep it was structural now. Part of how he was put together. Not vigilance exactly. Vigilance implies effort. This was simply how he received information. Any sound that was wrong would register as wrong before he consciously processed it. Nothing came. The night was quiet in the way the high desert is quiet at 2 and 3 in the morning. Deeply. Completely. With a quality that is not the absence of sound but the presence of something older than sound. The mountains sat in the dark. The stars moved overhead. A coyote called once from the direction of the north ridge. A single questioning note, and then went silent. She burned through the night, drifting in and out of something that wasn't sleep exactly. More like a place the body goes when it is occupied with its own emergency and cannot manage anything else. She spoke twice in the Apache language. Words he couldn't follow. Her voice rough and frightened, and coming from somewhere that was not this cabin and not this night. He dripped water between her lips with a cloth each time she surfaced. He fed more wood to the fire. He sat. He thought about Clara, which he didn't usually let himself do with this much directness. He thought about the way she had been sick at the end. The same heat, the same quality of struggle, the same sense of a body fighting something it couldn't name. He had sat beside her, too, in the same posture, the same helpless attention. The difference being that he had known Clara. He had been married to her for 22 years. He had known the particular sound of her breathing in sleep, and the way her hands moved when she was dreaming, and the specific quality of her silence when she was thinking versus when she was simply at rest. This woman was a stranger. He sat beside her anyway. The fire crackled. The night pressed against the cabin walls. The stars turned overhead without consulting anyone. In the morning, she was still alive. 4 days, that was how long the fever lasted. 4 days in which Oren's life reduced itself to its most essential components: water, fire, food, vigilance. He changed the dressings twice a day, each time a delicate negotiation between thoroughness and speed, because the wound needed to be clean and she needed to be disturbed as little as possible. He made broth from dried beef and whatever dried herbs Clara had packed away in the tin on the high shelf 4 years ago, which he had never opened because they were hers and touching them felt complicated. He opened them now. He used them, the smell of them, sage and something sweet, and something green he couldn't identify, filled the cabin for the first time in 4 years. It was not a bad smell. It was just a very particular smell that carried a great deal of weight, and he breathed it in anyway. She surfaced sometimes, eyes opening, focusing, slowly, with effort, on the ceiling, on the walls, on his face. And each time the same sequence, confusion, the slow and terrible recognition that she did not know where she was. And then the fear, not ordinary fear. The specific fear of a creature that has been cornered enough times to have developed a highly refined relationship with it. The fear that doesn't announce itself with sound or movement, but lives entirely in the eyes, in the calculation behind them. He had seen it in animals that had been trapped and released and trapped again. He had seen it in men who had been through certain kinds of things. He learned quickly not to move too fast near her, not to speak above a low register, not to crowd her space even when proximity was necessary for care. He announced himself before entering from outside. He kept his voice, when he used it, at a level and pitch that said nothing about threat. The same voice he used with Duster, he realized, and thought that she probably would not have appreciated the comparison if he'd said it out loud. He had soothed animals in worse states than this. He understood, without needing to examine the understanding, that the principle was the same. Presence without pressure, consistency without demand. Let the creature determine when it is safe. Don't argue the point or try to speed the process. The process takes as long as it takes. On the 3rd day, she grabbed his wrist. He was changing the dressing on the wound in her side, and the movement must have caught something, pressed something, and her hand came up and locked around his wrist, with a grip considerably stronger than he would have predicted from a person in her condition. He went absolutely still. She was looking at him, directly, aware. Her eyes had that quality now. Not the unfocused drifting of high fever, but something sharp underneath it. Still clouded by illness, but increasingly present. In her other hand, which she'd had under the blanket, was a small knife. A skinning knife. The kind you could tuck in a boot without bulk. The kind you don't notice until you're looking at it. It was positioned with the blade toward him, held with the practiced steadiness of someone who knows exactly how to hold it. He looked at the knife. He looked at her hand on his wrist. He looked at her face. She was ready to use it. He could see that plainly. Not waving it around, not being theatrical about it. She had it, and she was prepared to use it if he gave her a reason to. Simple as that. The logic of someone who has learned that waiting to see what happens costs more than acting early. Oren did not move his wrist. He did not reach for the knife. He did not speak. What he did was continue with the dressing. Slowly, carefully. As though the knife were not there. As though this were an ordinary Tuesday morning, and he was doing an ordinary thing, and she was someone he'd known long enough that none of this required comment. It was a deliberate performance of normalcy. He wanted her to believe that this was simply how things were here, that a person could be cared for without it costing them anything, without them having to pay for it, in ways she was obviously expecting to pay. When he was finished, he stood up. He walked to the other side of the cabin. He put the kettle on the fire. He did not look at her. After a while, long enough that he had poured 2 cups of water and drunk one, he heard the sound of the knife being set down on the wooden cot frame. A very small sound, but he heard it. He poured water into the second cup and brought it to the table beside her, set it down. Stepped back to the full width of the cabin. She watched him do all of this. He watched her watching him, from the periphery, not making it direct, not a confrontation, just an awareness. She reached for the cup. On the morning of the 4th day, the fever broke. He knew before he was fully awake because the quality of her breathing changed. He'd been in the chair, he'd stopped bothering with the bedroll in the back room after the first night, had simply stayed in the chair. In one of those half states where the body rests but doesn't fully release its hold on awareness. The change in her breath reached him, and he was upright and looking at her before he'd completed the thought. She was awake. Properly awake for the first time. Her eyes were clear, exhausted, dark-circled, sunken with the cost of what her body had gone through, but clear. The fever fog gone. She looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she turned her head and looked at him. He looked back. They stayed like that for a while, each taking stock of the other in a way that was mutual and acknowledged. Then she said, in English, which surprised him more than the knife had, "Water," one word, flat and direct as a compass reading. He got the water. The English came in pieces after that. Not constant, not easy. She used it when she needed to communicate something specific, and the alternative, silence or gesture, wouldn't carry the full weight. She used Apache the rest of the time, or more often nothing at all, which he was beginning to understand was its own form of communication. Her silences were not the same as absence. They were statements. The trick was learning which kind of statement each one was. She was a careful observer. He noticed this during the first days of her recovery, when she was still weak enough that her activity was limited to watching. She tracked him, his movements through the space, his habits, his routines. The way he checked the Winchester in the mornings and again at night. Methodical, thorough, a habit so old it was practically unconscious. The way he stood at the east window for 10 minutes after dawn every morning, looking at the terrain, reading it, the way a reader returns to a familiar page to see if anything has changed. The way he went quiet when he was thinking versus the way he was quiet when he was simply being. 2 different qualities of stillness that she identified, apparently, within the first 2 days. She was reading him. He accepted this as reasonable. He would have done the same. Her name she gave him on the 2nd day of her clarity. She touched her own chest. 1 finger. flat against her sternum. Saya, he repeated it. Let the syllables settle. The syllables settle. She looked at him for a moment longer, checking something. Whether he'd said it right, or whether the act of giving had produced anything she needed to evaluate. Then she looked away. He touched his own chest. Oren. A moment passed. Then, Oren, she said it with the precision of someone playing a tool in exactly the right spot. Not approximating. Getting it right. Close enough, he said. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Somewhere between assessment and something else. Something that might have been the early movement of dry amusement, though he wasn't certain enough to call it that. She looked away again, back at the window. At the October morning, coming in sideways in gold, he went outside to check the cattle. When he came back, she was sitting up on the cot, which he hadn't expected, and she was looking at the shelf of books, with a focused attention that stopped him in the doorway. Not the attention of someone looking at unfamiliar objects. The attention of someone who reads, who is assessing titles, evaluating, deciding. He noted this without comment and went about his morning. On the 4th day of her recovery, he brought her a hawk feather he'd found near the creek. Black-tipped, perfect. The kind you only find when the hawk has lost it without damage. He left it on the table beside her water cup, without comment, and went to fix the south fence post that had been requiring his attention. That evening he saw her, turning it over in her fingers, slowly, in the firelight, examining it the same way she examined everything. Not casually, not absently, but with full attention. He didn't say anything about it. She didn't say anything about it, but she kept it. He saw her tuck it into her small leather pouch, careful not to bend the vein. He went back to his book. He found it on the 5th day. Or rather, it found him. He had not gone through her things. He wouldn't have. But she'd asked him to bring her the small leather pouch from the shelf. She'd put it there herself. Once she was mobile enough to manage it, organizing her few possessions, with the efficiency of someone accustomed to having very little. And when he handed it to her, the tie had worked loose somehow, and a folded piece of paper slipped out and fell to the floor between them. She reached for it at the same moment he did. Their hands arrived at the same time. Neither of them touched it. A beat of stillness. He straightened up without it. She picked it up. She held it and looked at him, with an expression he'd come to recognize. The one that meant she was deciding something. Running a calculation. The calculation had inputs he couldn't see and outputs he was waiting for. Whatever she decided took about 3 seconds. She held the paper out to him. He hesitated. Then he took it. Unfolded it carefully, the way you unfold old documents. Slowly, at the creases, respecting what the paper had already been through. It was older than it looked. The quality of paper from the late 1860s. Government issue. He recognized the texture of it from his army years. Heavy, slightly rough, made to last. And it was an official document. He could see that at a glance from the letterhead, the seal, the dense formal language in the body of the text. He read it again, more slowly. It was dated 1868, 6 years ago. A legal recognition, formal, witnessed, bearing a genuine government seal. Of the Apache Jicarilla, people's right to occupy and protect a specific tract of land in the northern New Mexico territory. The boundaries were precisely described, referencing landmarks he knew. The signatories were listed. 2 Apache names he didn't recognize, an official of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, a government surveyor. It was, in short, a treaty. Small in scope, but real. Witnessed and sealed and filed, and written at the bottom, in a different hand from the rest, a note in careful script. Any construction or development project requiring passage through this territory must receive explicit written consent from the recognized Apache leadership. This consent cannot be obtained through coercion, payment, or threat. Absence of consent constitutes legal blockage under federal land jurisdiction. He looked up. She was watching him read. Waiting. He looked back at the document. He was thinking about something. working through it the way he worked through terrain, piece by piece, understanding each element before looking at what all the elements meant together. Railroad. He thought about the Atlantic and Southwestern Railroad. He'd heard about it in town 3 months ago, a new extension planned through this part of the territory. A significant investment. The kind of project that had senators and investors and considerable political momentum all behind it, that moved with the confidence of something decided in rooms far from here. He thought about the brand on Saya's arm. He thought about why an organization, a railroad company or its agents, would brand a woman before shooting her and leaving her for dead. Not to punish her. To mark, to say, we know who you are. We know what you carry, and if you surface anywhere, we will know. They weren't looking for treasure or resources. They were looking for this. Because if this document reached the right desk in Washington, submitted by someone with legal standing, accompanied by the right kind of testimony, the Atlantic and Southwestern Railroad's planned route through the Jicarilla territory would be stopped, not delayed, not rerouted temporarily, stopped, legally. The kind of stop that doesn't get undone easily. He folded the document carefully. He held it out to her. She took it, held it for a moment. Then she looked at him with an expression he was only beginning to develop vocabulary for, the particular layering of exhaustion and determination that belongs to people who have been carrying something important for a very long time. They killed my father for it, she said. Flat. Direct. The way she said everything important. Yes, he said. They will come here, probably. She held his gaze. You understand what that means? I do, he said. He sat down in his chair. He laced his hands together and looked at the fire for a long moment. He was thinking about Aldous Dryden. He hadn't made the connection immediately. That bothered him a little. The idea that his mind had slowed enough, over 4 years of solitude, to miss something it would have caught faster once. But he made it now, sitting with the folded document on the table, between them and the fire, doing its quiet work in the hearth. Aldous Dryden, he knew that name. Had known it for 9 years, in the specific way you know something you've tried to put away. Not forgotten, just relocated to a part of yourself you don't visit. In 1865. After the war was done, and he was back in the territory working as a scout for the Army, Orrin had filed a report. Formal. Through the correct channels, to the correct authority, using the correct language. The report described something he had witnessed. A unit of soldiers, acting on the orders of their commanding officer, burning a small settlement of Pueblo families who had refused to relocate. Not a military action. Not a response to aggression. A clearing operation. Carried out with the efficiency of people who had done similar work before and were not particularly troubled by it. The commanding officer had been Captain Dryden, young, precise. The kind of officer who believed that effective execution was its own justification, who had organized the action the way you organize a supply run, methodically, without evident feeling. Orrin's report had gone up the chain and stopped. He'd been told, eventually, that the matter had been reviewed and no actionable evidence of wrongdoing had been found. He'd been told this by a man who could not quite meet his eyes while saying it. He had understood what this meant and what it didn't mean, and he had sat with the specific helplessness of that understanding for a long time. And then he had moved on, because what else do? You make the report. The report disappears. You move on. He had been moving on for 9 years. He looked at Saya Colonel Dryden now, promoted, attached to a railroad company, with enough money and political connection, to move through this territory with the confidence of something that had already been approved by everyone who mattered, the same man. The same method, a different obstacle to remove. What does he look like? Orrin said. Saya described him. Tall, silver-haired, straight-backed in the saddle. A man who dressed carefully, who spoke carefully, who had the manner of someone so accustomed to getting what he wanted that he'd lost whatever muscle handles alternatives. Oren knew exactly who she was describing. He stood up. He went to the window. Outside, the high desert rolled away in the afternoon light, mesquite and red rock and the long, flat silence of it, beautiful and indifferent. He had filed a report. The report had disappeared. He had moved on. What he had never quite allowed himself to examine directly was whether moving on was the same as being finished. Whether removing yourself from a situation resolved it, or simply relocated you within it. Whether the distance he'd put between himself and what he'd witnessed was wisdom or desertion, he had run. That was the honest word for it. He had taken himself far enough away that he couldn't see the fire anymore, and he had called the distance wisdom and called the silence peace. And it was neither of those things. It was just distance. He looked at the terrain through the window, at his valley. At the place he had chosen for its isolation, for the specific quality of its remove from everything that had got inside him, and refused to come out clean. Which had, apparently, not been quite isolated enough. "He'll come here," Oren said. "Yes," said Saya, "looking for you." And, for the document, yes, he turned around, she was watching him. That direct, unsentimental quality of attention that he was coming to understand was simply how she engaged with anything that needed to be assessed honestly. "I could tell you to go," he said, "before he gets here, give you a horse and supplies and point you north. You'd have a day's lead." "You could," she agreed. "Is that what you want?" She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, thinking. She did not waste words on things she hadn't thought about. "What I want," she said, "is for that document to reach Washington, and you? I am less important than the document." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're wrong about that," he said. "But we can argue about it later." He went to the shelf above the fireplace, where he kept a tin box with some paper and a stub of pencil. He took them down. "Tell me about Dryden," he said. "Everything you know," she told him. "He came on the 8th day." Oren saw the dust before he saw the riders, from the high point of the north pasture fence, where he was working. He watched it for a moment, with the stillness of someone who has learned to look before moving, to understand what's coming before it arrives. 6 riders, plus 1 in front. 7 total. They came down the valley road, at the pace of people with enough authority that hurrying would be beneath them. Equipped, unhurried, the approach of people conducting a business transaction. He set down the fencing pliers. He picked up the Winchester. He walked back to the cabin. Saya was inside. She read his face when he came through the door with the accuracy of someone who has spent 2 weeks learning the vocabulary of a specific person's expression. What the set of the jaw means, what the eyes do when the calculation is running fast. "How many?" she said. 7. She stood immediately. No wasted motion. He held up one hand, flat. "Stay." She stopped. "Behind the curtain," he said. "All the way. Don't come out." She looked at him for a second. He saw the thing behind her eyes, the thing that said she was not accustomed to taking instructions from people she'd known for 8 days, and that the only reason she was doing it now was that the specific logic of this situation made it correct. Then she went behind the curtain that divided the sleeping alcove from the main room. All the way. He took a breath, let it out slowly, and opened the door. Dryden sat his horse the way Oren had known he would. Straight, easy, the posture of a man who had made a long study of looking like authority. Silver hair under a dark hat. A coat that was military in cut but civilian in material. The specific combination of someone who wants the associations of command, without the accountability of rank. His face was composed. Still in the way of a pond you can't see the bottom of. Behind him 6 men. Professional formation. Hands near belts but not on them. Horses quiet. Dryden's eyes found Oren and stayed there. Pale eyes. Gray-green. Calculating not in the anxious way of someone doing math under pressure, but in the practiced way of someone for whom calculation is as natural as breathing. "Good afternoon," Dryden said. His voice was exactly as Saya had described. Measured, pleasant. The voice of someone who had learned that pleasantness was a more efficient tool than force in most situations. My name is Colonel Aldous Dryden. I'm an agent for the Atlantic and Southwestern Railroad. I apologize for coming without notice. The Postal Service leaves something to be desired out here. It does, Orrin agreed. Are you the owner of this property? I am, Dryden smiled. Technically a smile. We're searching for an Apache woman. She was involved in an incident some days east of here. Wounded, traveling alone. We have reason to believe she may have come through this valley. Orrin looked at him. He let the pause sit for exactly as long as a man who genuinely had nothing to hide might pause when considering an unexpected question. I haven't seen anyone, he said. Just me out here. Early winter's keeping me busy, but I'd have noticed a stranger. Dryden's smile remained precisely where it was. Of course. It's possible she went north instead. He looked past Orrin at the cabin, with a glance that was so brief and so thorough, it was almost admirable. A professional's glance, taking inventory without appearing to. You're alone out here? 4 years, Orrin said. A hard life, I manage, I'm sure you do. Dryden's eyes came back to him. You were Army, if I'm not mistaken. That's a scout's posture, was Orrin said. Long time ago. Once a scout, always a scout. Dryden tilted his head very slightly. Tell me, if a wounded woman had come through this valley, do you think you'd have helped her? Instinct of service and all that. The question had a specific shape. He recognized it. Not really a question about him. A question about whether he was likely to have helped. Establishing, for his own purposes, what Orrin's inclinations might be. He looked at Dryden with the flatness that 11 days of phyllis of silence and 40 years of deliberate practice had built into his face. Depends on the woman, he said. Dryden studied him for one moment more. Something moved behind those pale eyes that was not quite readable and not quite hidden. A recalibration. Then he touched the brim of his hat. We'll leave you to your work. If you see anything, the railroad office in Mallow Creek can reach me, noted, Orrin said. Dryden turned his horse. The 6 men followed. They rode back up the valley road with the unhurried pace of people simple who were not worried about what happened next because they had done this before, and it always worked out for them eventually. Orrin watched them until they were out of sight, then he went inside. Saya came out from behind the curtain. She stood in the middle of the cabin and looked at him. That was him, she said. Yes, a moment. You lied for me, she said. He went to the table, poured water from the pitcher into a cup, drank it. Set the cup down. I told him I hadn't seen anyone. He looked at her. I hadn't seen anyone worth handing over to a man like that. She held his gaze for a long time. He recognized you, she said. Orrin went still. When he asked if you were Army, she said. He knew the answer before he asked. He was checking something else. Orrin had noticed this. Had noticed it in the moment, and filed it, and here she was, 8 days into her recovery, reading a conversation she had heard from behind a curtain, with the same precision she brought to everything. He knows my name, Orrin said. Yes, or he'll know it by tomorrow. Yes, he sat down. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at them. The knuckles, the old scars, the work-ruined skin of hands that had been used for everything a life in the territory required. Then he looked up. He'll be back, Orrin said. With more men and a different approach. Yes, Saya said. He will, so we need to be ready for that. She looked at him with that direct, level attention. We, she said, not a question. A word being tested. Held up to the light to examine whether it was solid. We, he said. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind came down off the mountains with the first real teeth of coming winter in it. The valley was quiet and darkening, and very far from anywhere that had a name on a map. Saya looked at him for one more moment. Then she sat down across from him. And that, without any ceremony at all, was how it began. They did not discuss the arrangement. That was the thing about it. No conversation, where they sat down and decided what they were doing and what it meant. No moment where either of them said, "This is the situation. These are the terms." It just started. The morning after Dryden's visit, Orrin woke before dawn, which was not unusual. His body had given up on sleeping past 4 in the morning, sometime around the second year alone, and he came out of the back room to find Saya already at the hearth. She had the fire going. She was heating water. Doing these things with the quiet competence of someone who has been managing her own survival for long enough that the basics happen automatically, without requiring the conscious mind's attention. She looked up when he came in. He looked at the fire, at the water, at her. "Coffee," she said, not a question. A statement of what was already happening. "Thank you," he said. She handed him the cup. He drank it standing at the east window, looking at the terrain, coming visible in the gray, pre-dawn light. She stood at the other window, looking north. They were both doing the same thing. Both reading the landscape for what it would tell them, before the day got bright enough to become something else. This was, Orrin thought, an unusual way to share a morning with another person. And also, somehow, exactly, right, she told him about her father on the 4th morning. Not because he asked, he hadn't. He'd learned that asking Saya things directly was about as productive as asking the wind to hold still. She told you things when she'd decided you needed to know them, and the timeline was hers entirely. And pushing it produced only a quality of silence that was somehow louder than ordinary silence. They were sitting at the table, breakfast done, cups still in hand. The morning light was doing that specific thing it does in October in the high desert, coming in low and gold and making everything it touched look as though it were being considered carefully before being permitted to continue existing. She set her cup down. "My father's name was Chaitin," she said. Orrin said nothing, didn't move. He understood instinctively that this required a kind of stillness, the kind you bring to something fragile, something that would stop if you breathed wrong. "He was not a warrior," she said. "Not in the way that word usually means. He was a man who understood that the longest battles are fought with patience, with record, with the willingness to write things down and keep them." She was looking at the table. When she said this, 6 years ago, a government official came through the territory, a man named Alderman. He was one of the few. She paused briefly. One of the few who seemed to understand that what was happening to my people was not progress. It was erasure. Her voice stayed level throughout. He offered my father a formal agreement, a legal document recognizing our right to that land. My father accepted. He understood that a paper with a government seal was something a man like Dryden would have to go around rather than through. Orrin turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands. "Chaitin kept that document," Saya said. "He told no one where it was except me. Because I was his eldest." She stopped. Shorter pause this time. Just a beat. He said, "I was the one who understood what things were worth." She was still looking at the table, but her jaw was set in the way he'd come to recognize, that structural determination that seemed built into her at a level below choice. The level where a person simply is what they are. When Dryden came, she said, "My father refused him, the first time with words, the second time with silence. The third time, she touched her forearm, the one with the brand. Brief, then her hand came back to the table. My father still refused. He did not tell them about the document. He did not tell them where it was. He did not tell them anything. Silence. He was still alive when I ran," she said. "I do not think he was still alive when I stopped running. The fire said something the way fires do. A small crack, a settling of wood into itself. He told me to go," she said. "He said, 'You are the memory. If you die, the memory dies. Go.'" She picked up her cup and drank, set it down, and that was all she said about Chaitin. Orrin sat with it for a long time after she went outside. He sat with the specific weight of a story he'd just been trusted with. Because that's what it was. Trust. Not the casual kind, not the social kind, but the real kind that costs something. That requires the person extending it, to have made a genuine calculation about whether you deserve it. She had decided he did. He wasn't sure he agreed with her assessment. He thought about 1865, about the report, about the Pueblo families and the burning, and the young Captain Dryden, who had ordered it with the calm of someone completing a routine task. He thought about how he had filed the paperwork and used the correct language, and believed, briefly, correct channels led somewhere. They led to a desk. The desk led to another desk. Somewhere in that chain, the thing he'd reported stopped existing as something that required a response. He had been 39 years old enough, if to know better than to be surprised. He had been a scout, an observer, a man paid to notice things accurately and then to step back while other men decided what to do with the informations. Step back. He was good at stepping back. He acknowledged to himself now, exceptional at it. He stood up, went to the window, looked at the terrain he knew like the inside of his own hands, every rock, every gully, every shadow, and he thought, "You came here to step back from everything, the war, the army, the things you couldn't stop and the things you stopped looking at. You came here to be done, and here was Dryden in his valley, and here was Saya, who had run 3 days with a bullet in her and had not told them anything, and here was a document on his table that could stop this, legally and permanently, if it reached the right hands." Orrin looked at his own reflection in the window glass. Faint. The way he looked when the light was wrong. "You're done stepping back," he said to it. His reflection didn't argue. The preparations began that afternoon. No preamble. He came in from outside, took the hand-drawn diagram of the property he'd sketched the previous night, spread it flat on the table and started marking it. Entry points, lines of sight. The places where the terrain worked for him, and the places where it would work for whoever was coming. Saya sat down across from him without being asked. She looked at the diagram, then at him. Then she reached over and pointed to the north approach. "This looks flat," she said. "It is flat. From out there, does it look flat?" He thought about it. "No. There's a rise 50 yards out that makes the approach look shorter than it is. So they will underestimate the distance." "Yes. Show me where the ground is soft," he showed her. And she added to the diagram, not with the pencil, she didn't reach for it, didn't presume, but with her hands, indicating, shaping the air above the paper. She knew things about terrain that he didn't. Not tactical things exactly. Ecological things. The way certain plants marked the edge of soft ground. The way wind moved differently across a depression you couldn't see directly. The way shadow fell at different times of day and what it revealed and what it hid. She was teaching him. He was learning. This was also, somehow, not a thing that required discussion. The work that followed was physical and hard and consuming in the way that good physical work is consuming. It reached down past thought and talked directly to the body. They moved stones along the north approach. Not blockades, nothing obvious, just a specific arrangement of loose rock in the places where a running horse would find uncertain footing. They rerouted 2 feet of the creek channel over 3 days of steady digging, redirecting it through a shallow depression that would be invisible from the ridge but would turn the eastern approach into something that looked passable and wasn't. He showed her the rocky outcrop 400 yards to the east-northeast. Good cover. Clear sight line to the entire valley floor. "This is where I'll be," he said. She looked at the barn, at the loft, at the angle it commanded. "This is where I'll be," she said. He looked at the angle she was describing, the triangulation it created with his position, the way together they covered ground that neither could cover alone. He nodded. They did not say what they were preparing for, in those direct terms. They didn't need to, and saying it out loud would have given it a quality neither of them was ready for yet. Somewhere in those weeks, a thing started happening that Orrin didn't have a name for. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing announced it. It wasn't even a single moment he could locate afterward. He tried and couldn't. It was in the way she handed him coffee in the mornings, without asking how he took it because she'd watched him make it enough times to know. It was in the way he started leaving the lamp burning when he went to check the perimeter at night. Because she read after supper, and he'd noticed she didn't like to stop mid-page. It was in the way they worked beside each other for hours, without talking, and the silence had a different quality than the silence of being alone. Fuller, more textured, the inhabited quality of a shared space. He noticed things, the way she moved when she thought he wasn't watching, less careful, more herself, whatever herself was, in its unconstructed form. The way she sometimes looked at the horizon with an expression that was grief and calculation in equal measure. The expression of someone who has not finished grieving because they haven't finished surviving yet, and both processes are running at once. The way, when something was physically difficult, her side still aching, though she never said so, he could see it in the line of her movement when she'd been working too long. She simply paused, breathed, waited for her body to give her the next step. No complaint, no dramatic announcement, just the steady negotiation of a person with the current limits of their condition. He found this specifically difficult to look at directly. Clara had moved the same way near the end. That quality of working with what you had rather than fighting what you didn't. Clara had said once, in the middle of being sick, that you had two choices when your body stopped cooperating. Fight it or work with it, and fighting was just exhausting. He had told her that sounded like giving up. She had looked at him with the expression she reserved for, when he was being particularly dense. Oren. Working with something is not the same as giving in to it. It means you're paying attention. He was paying attention. He was paying a great deal of attention to things he hadn't paid attention to in 4 years. This worried him in a low, persistent way that he chose not to examine during daylight hours. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. He'd sent it nearly a month earlier, on his supply run to Mallow Creek before Dryden's first visit, in an envelope addressed to Julius Garrett, a man whose name meant something specific, the one person Oren still knew in Washington, who had read his 1865 report and said quietly, with the specific exhaustion of a man who has tried to do right inside a system that doesn't reward it. I believe you. The timing isn't right, but I believe you. Julius Garrett was now a senior clerk in the Department of the Interior. Not powerful, not connected in the way that moved mountains, but real, honest, and in possession of enough institutional knowledge to understand what a legitimate land recognition document meant if it arrived with the right supporting testimony. Oren's letter had explained, without excess, what he had, what he knew, what he needed. The reply was brief. Julius Garrett wrote practically without decoration, says the document and your sworn account. I know two people. One is a lawyer who handles federal land claims. One is a journalist who has been looking for exactly this kind of case for 18 months. Between the three of us, I believe something can be made to move. How long do you need? Oren read this twice, folded it, put it in his breast pocket. He had not told Saya about the letter yet. He told her that evening. He put Julius Garrett's reply on the table. She picked it up and read it. Her English reading was better than her spoken English, fluid and complete. She moved through it quickly, and then went back to certain passages more slowly. She set it down. You sent this before the preparations were finished, she said. Yes, before you knew how many men Dryden would bring. Yes, before you knew how this would go. Yes. She looked at him. Why? Because fighting is the short answer, he said. We needed to be ready to fight. But fighting only solves the immediate problem. Dryden is not the only one. There's money behind him and political interest that doesn't go away when one man goes away. He paused. The document is the long answer. But only if it gets somewhere that can use it. She held his gaze. You thought this through before you asked me anything, she said. Not accusing. Noting. I was a scout, he said. Reading ahead is what I did. Something moved in her expression. Something that wasn't quite a smile, but had the quality of one, the warmth of one, briefly under the surface. "How long did he ask for?" she said. "He asked how long we need." She looked at the window. At the night outside, the mountains dark, the stars beginning. 30 days minimum, she said, for the letter to travel and for something to begin moving in Washington. That's what I thought. Dryden will not wait 30 days. No, Orrin agreed. He won't, so we fight first, she said, and the document travels while we fight. Yes, she nodded once. The nod of someone who has understood the full shape of a plan. Show me the letter you sent, she said. I want to know what you told him, he showed her. She read it carefully. She did not comment on the content. She handed it back without corrections, which told him he'd gotten it right. But as she handed it back, she said, You included your account of 1865. Of what Dryden did, yes. That is personal testimony. That is your own risk, I know that. She was quiet for a moment. You were waiting, she said, for the right time to use it. It hit him somewhere in the chest. Not painfully. More like recognition, the particular quality of being seen clearly by someone who has no stake in seeing you as better than you are. Maybe, he said. Not maybe, she said. Flat, direct, without judgment. You had been waiting, and the right time arrived. In your barn. He looked at the letter. In my barn, he agreed. The box was on the shelf. It had been there for 4 years. Orrin knew every object on that shelf, the way you know the furniture of a room you've lived in alone, intimately, without having to look. The almanacs. Clara's 3 novels. The tin of medicinal herbs now open and half-used. The rock with the copper vein he'd kept for no articulable reason. And the box small, cedar. Dovetailed corners made well. He had made it himself in the winter of 1864, during the months when the ground was frozen, and the outdoor work slowed, and his hands needed something to do, that his mind didn't have to supervise. He hadn't made it for anything specific, and then the letter had arrived, the private's letter, which said Eli was dead, and called him brave. And attached to it, tucked inside the same envelope, included by the private without knowing what it was, a second piece of paper. In Eli's handwriting, addressed to Orrin, sealed, written before. He had known immediately what it was. Soldiers wrote them. Before engagements, they weren't for certain to owe. They wrote letters to the people they needed to speak to, and left them in the keeping of someone who could deliver them if necessary. He had held the envelope for a long time, and then he had put it in the cedar box, on the shelf, and he had not opened it, not in 10 years. He had told himself various things about why. That he wasn't ready. That reading it would make something irreversible. That Eli was in that letter, alive on the page, and as long as it stayed sealed, that version of the morning it was written still existed somewhere in the world. These were stories. He knew they were stories. He was afraid. That was the honest word. A 58-year-old man who had been through a war and tracked through dangerous country and built a life with his hands. Afraid of a letter. He did not find the box. She found it. He came in from the afternoon's work to find her at the shelf. Not snooping. She was looking at the spines of Clara's novels, the same focused attention she brought to books. She had read 2 of the almanacs already, and moved on to a general history of the territory that she'd worked through in less than a week. But she had stopped up to the soft .12 with the cedar box in her hands, not open. Just holding it. Turning it slightly. She heard him come in, turned. Saw his face. She held the box out. Not offering it, asking. Her eyes asking. He understood the difference between the two. He stood in the doorway. For a moment he considered saying nothing. Taking the box. Putting it back. He had years of practice at this maneuver. At redirecting attention. Away from the things he didn't want to approach. Except she was watching him. And she had a quality. It was not something she did deliberately. It was simply something she was. Of making pretense feel heavier than it usually did. Not because she pushed. Not because she demanded. But because she was so thoroughly honest herself that dishonesty felt different around her. more visible, more cost-istal. My son wrote it, he said, before he died. I haven't read it. She looked at the box. Then at him. 10 years, he said. I know that's. He stopped. I know. She set the box on the table, not pushing it toward him, just placing it where it was available. Then she went to the hearth and started the evening fire, and she did not look at him, and she did not say anything, and the cabin did the thing it sometimes did when they were both in it. Filled up with something that was neither sound nor silence, but partook of both. He sat down. He looked at the box. He thought about Eli in his good shirt, in the photograph, not knowing what to do with his arms. He thought about the private's letter, which said brave and said nothing. He thought about Chayton, who had refused to speak no matter what they did, who had said to his daughter, "You are the memory. Go." He thought about what it means to carry something so long you've forgotten you're carrying it. His hands moved. He opened the box. Eli's handwriting was his mother's. He'd always had Clara's handwriting, which Orrin had found improbably tender, that a son could carry a parent in something, as small and specific as the way he formed letters. The letter was 2 pages. He read it. He read it carefully. The way you approach something you've been afraid of. Attention on each part before moving to the next. His hands on the pages were steady. His breathing was steady. The fire was going behind him, and Saya was somewhere in the cabin, and none of that was quite present while he read. Eli wrote about the war first. The practical parts. How tired everyone was. How the coffee had been bad for 3 weeks because of a supply problem. And how this had done more damage to morale than anything the enemy had managed, which he found funny, and suspected Pa would find funny too. And then the tone changed. I keep thinking about something you told me when I was maybe 12. You probably don't remember it. I asked you once if you were scared in the field, and you said yes sometimes. I asked how you kept going when you were scared, and you said it wasn't about stopping the fear. You said a real man isn't someone who doesn't feel afraid. A real man is someone who is afraid and goes to the right place anyway. I think about that all the time out here. I think it's the best thing you ever taught me. Maybe the best thing anyone ever taught me. I'm scared, Pa. Pretty much all the time. But I'm in the right place. I believe that. I hope you do too. Your son, Elioran, set the letter down. He sat with it. The fire moved. The cabin was warm. Outside, the wind was doing something low and constant. He didn't cry. He had cried already, once a decade ago, in the yard behind the cabin, where no one could see, and that had been enough. What he felt now was different. Not grief, or not only grief, something alongside it that had the strange quality of relief, because Eli had known, had understood, had taken the thing Orrin had tried to teach him, and held it carefully enough that it was still there, available to write down, in the last days. A real man is someone who is afraid and goes to the right place anyway. He had been in the wrong place for 4 years. He knew that now he had been afraid of feeling what he felt, afraid of caring again about things that could be taken, afraid of being again what he had been before the losses stacked up. And he had come here and called it wisdom and called it peace. And it was neither of those things. It was just fear, wearing better clothes. He put the letter back in the box. He sat for a while longer. Then he stood up. Saya was at the table, reading the almanac, or appearing to read it. He suspected she had not turned a page in some time. He said, I taught him that a real man isn't someone who doesn't get scared. Orrin said, he's someone who gets scared and goes to the right place anyway. She looked up. He was 19, Orrin said. He understood it better than I did. She looked at him for a long moment. You understand it now, she said. He picked up the diagram of the property. He laid it on the table. Show me the north approach again, he said. The way you'd read it if you were coming in blind. She set the almanac aside. She showed him. The smoke came on a Thursday. He saw it from the fence line, north pasture, northwest corner. A dark column rising with the specific purposefulness of fire that has been set rather than started. By the time he rode hard to it, there was nothing to save. A significant portion of his winter grazing land. Gone. The black and smoking ruin of it stretching across ground that would take years to recover. He sat on duster at the edge of it, and looked at what Dryden had done, and thought with a cold specificity about a man in an expensive coat speaking pleasantly about the nature of progress. He rode back without hurrying. Hurrying announces you. Saya was on the roof of the barn when he returned. He didn't ask why. He already knew. She had climbed up to look at the smoke, and while she was up there, had assessed the angle, and was now taking inventory of what could be seen from that height. Practical. Even now, he stood in the yard and looked up at her. The whole northwest corner, he said. How long for winter? Cattle will have to go. I can sell them before the hard cold. He stopped calculating. I'll manage. She came down from the roof cleanly and stood in front of him with that direct look. This is to show you what he can do, she said. I know. He will escalate. I know. We have perhaps 10 days before he moves with full force. That's my estimate. She nodded. Then, the fence in the south pasture needs another post. The end one. Hard wind before this is over, and it'll pull the whole line. He looked at her. We still have 10 days of work to do, she said. Burning your pasture doesn't change the work. He almost laughed. He didn't. He wasn't, generally, a man who laughed easily, but the almost of it surprised him. The specific quality of almost laughter that comes from someone saying a true thing in an unexpected way, at an unexpected moment with complete seriousness. South pasture, he agreed. They went to fix the fence. Cobb arrived at dusk, alone, which was either very confident or very stupid. With Cobb, Orrin had determined it was the former. A big man with a face that had been constructed, apparently, to not feel weather. He pulled up at the gate without dismounting. Orrin was already in the yard. Colonel Dryden makes a final offer, Cobb said. Flat. Efficient. $600. The woman. No further action against your property? No, Orrin said. Cobb looked at him for a moment. The next time I come out here, I won't be by myself. I know. You understand what that means. I do. Cobb looked at him with the expression of someone trying to determine whether the person across from them is brave or simply broken. He seemed to decide it didn't matter which. He rode away. Orrin watched him go. Then he went inside. She was packing. He saw it the moment he came through the door. The small bundle on the cot, her medicine pouch, the document, the hawk feather wrapped in cloth, her hands moving with the economy of someone who has packed in a hurry before and knows exactly how. He stopped. I will go tonight, she said without looking up. Lead them east. Give you time. No. She looked up. No, he said again. Orrin, this is not your decision to make alone. It is my trouble. It stopped being only your trouble when I picked you up in my barn. He crossed the room and sat down at the table, directly in her sight line. You leaving doesn't fix anything. You're still healing. And they are better at tracking than you're giving them credit for. I am also better at moving than you give me credit for. Maybe, he said. But this. He gestured at the cabin, the diagram, the weeks of work between them. This is a better plan than you running. You know it is. She looked at him. He looked back. He understood her kind of stubbornness by now. Not reckless, not irrational, based on a real calculation about cost and who should bear it. So he gave her a real answer instead of reassurance. You want to go because you think staying costs me too much, he said. The pasture, the risk. All of it. She said nothing, which was yes. You're wrong, he said. You know what staying here cost me before you showed up? Nothing. Because I wasn't doing anything worth losing. Something moved in her face. Something he couldn't name precisely. I am not a man who has somewhere else to be, he said. I came here to not have somewhere else to be. And then you arrived, and now, he stopped. Started again. Now I have somewhere to be. I'd prefer not to let it get set on fire. She looked at him for a long time. The cabin was very quiet. The bundle sat on the cot between them. She reached over and began unpacking it, unhurrying. The document back in its place, The hawk feather unwrapped and set back on the shelf. She sat down. She looked at the diagram on the table. The east approach, she said. I want to add something to it. He pulled the diagram toward them. She showed him. Late that night, when the fire had burned down to coals, she asked about Clara. He was in his chair. She was at the table, hands folded, and he'd thought she was almost asleep. Then, tell me about Clara, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. Direct, as always. You have a photograph. She had red hair. She did, he said. She hated it when she was young. Said it made her look angry even when she wasn't. Did she look angry? No, he said. She looked like herself, which was not angry. He was quiet for a moment. She noticed things. More than most people. Small things. The way a room felt. What somebody meant when they said something different from what they said. She'd have noticed you the moment you walked in the door. Not the wound? Not. He gestured vaguely at everything this situation contained. You. She would have seen you. Sisaya was quiet. She sounds like someone who paid attention, she said. She paid attention to everything except her own health, he said. Which was the problem? The fever. Yes, silence. A comfortable one. The kind that holds things rather than divides them. My mother was the same way, Saya said. She was a healer. She would treat anyone. And she would not rest when she was sick herself, because there was always someone else who needed her. Pause. She died when I was 17. Treating an illness she'd caught from a child she was treating. Oren looked at the coals. Women like that, he said. Yes, Saya said. Women like that. Another silence. Clara used to grow things in the house, he said. In winter, when nothing outside was growing, she would have things growing in pots on the windowsill. She said she couldn't go 3 months without green sa. He looked at the bare windowsill. He followed her eyes to it. I stopped, he said. I know, she said. He looked at the windowsill for a while. When this is over, he said. She said nothing. But she didn't say if, and neither did he. They checked everything one last time, every position, every loose stone, every line of sight. They moved through the property in the dark, separately at first, then together, confirming what they knew and what they'd assumed, and where the gaps were. When they came back to the cabin, they stood in the yard for a moment. Above them, the stars were immense and indifferent, and very beautiful. The specific kind of beauty that exists in large spaces at night. The kind that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with something much older. 30 years ago, Oren said, a scout I trained under told me the best position is the one the other side doesn't know you have. He was right, she said. They think they're coming for one old man and a wounded woman, he said. They are, she said. We are just not what they think we are. He looked at the dark outline of the mountains. No, he said. We're not. She went inside. He stood in the yard a little longer. The wind was cold. The stars were burning without consulting anyone about it, the way they had been burning for longer than he could make himself imagine. Ellie's letter was in the cedar box on the shelf. A real man is afraid and goes to the right place anyway. He was in the right place. He went inside. He sat in his chair. He waited for morning. The morning came in gray, not the soft gray of an ordinary dawn, the hard gray. The flat kind that sits on the land like a held breath and doesn't move and tells you, if you know how to read it, that something is about to happen, and the sky itself is waiting to see which way it goes. Oren had been awake since 3. He hadn't moved from the chair. The fire had burned down to coals, and he hadn't fed it. The cold of the cabin was just information. His body had learned long ago to treat cold as information rather than discomfort. You note it, you keep going. He was listening, not for anything specific, for the absence of things. The coyotes had stopped before 4, earlier than usual. The quality of silence on the North Ridge had a density to it, hate, that you only get when something large and quiet is moving through a space, and everything that lives there has already made its calculation and gone still. He stood, he crossed to the east window, looked out, gray light, the mountains darker than the sky. The valley floor running south, fence posts emerging slowly as his eyes adjusted. And there, on the north ridge, the very faintest disturbance in the line of it. A shape where the shape should be clean, then another. He stopped counting at 12. He picked up the Winchester. He went to the back room, where Saya was already awake, already sitting up, already watching him come through the door, with total attention and no wasted energy on surprise. North Ridge, he said. How many? At least 12. Probably more. She was on her feet before he finished the sentence. Bow already strung. She'd done it the night before, left it within reach, quiver over her shoulder. The document folded inside her jacket, close to her body, where it had been every day since they'd agreed on the plan. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was a lot in that look. Things they hadn't said and probably didn't need to say, and maybe never would need to say, because they were both people who understood that the most important things don't always require language. They require presence. They require the other person to know, without being told that you are there. She knew. He knew your position, he said. Your position, she said. She went out the side door, low, fast, no wasted movement, the darkness still thick enough to cover her. She crossed the yard and slipped into the barn and disappeared. He went out the back. The outcrop was cold. 400 yards from the cabin, a natural shelf of rock he'd identified in his first week in the valley as the best defensive position in the area. He'd spent 3 weeks improving it, small adjustments, nothing visible from below, places for his elbows, clear sightline to every approach angle, the rock at his back providing relative warmth, the kind a boulder holds from the previous day's sun. He settled in, he waited. Dawn came reluctantly. The gray lightning by degrees so gradual you couldn't catch the moment it changed. 5 minutes ago he couldn't see the creek. Now he could. Now he could see them. 15 riders, coming down the north ridge in a loose, confident formation. The arrogance of numbers. They were spread wide enough to cover the obvious approach angles, but not wide enough, because being wide enough would have required knowing the terrain the way he knew it, and they did not know it that way. Dryden in the center, silver hair, even at this distance. That straight-backed silhouette, unhurried, Cobb on his left. The big man's shape unmistakable at a quarter mile. 14 others. Some military in their bearing, the hired kind. Others simply men who'd been paid, which was a different and generally less disciplined category. Orrin breathed. He had done this before. Not this exactly, not with a woman in a barn behind him, and everything that mattered contained in a valley he could see from this rock. But the mechanics of it. The breath, the stillness, the way you narrow your entire existence to the thing directly in front of you. Right now this was his business, the point rider claim. First, 2 men, 20 yards ahead of the main group. Standard formation. They weren't expecting resistance. He let them reach 250, 200. He breathed out. The Winchester spoke. The sound rolled across the valley. The left point man went down, clean. Not about display, just the grim arithmetic of the situation. Chaos. Immediate. Horses wheeling before the men reacted, because horses are faster at understanding certain things than people are. Dryden did not wheel. He sat very still, and looked toward the outcrop with the calculating stillness of a man identifying a problem. Cobb was already shouting, rallying the remaining men forward rather than back. The correct tactical response to an elevated shooter with a single rifle. Close the distance. Deny the angle. Use numbers. He was good. Orrin gave him that. Orrin moved. You don't stay in one position. Fire, move, fire again. The shooter who stays is a target. The shooter who keeps moving is a problem that's hard to fix. He was at the second position, 12 yards north. Lower angle when the barn spoke. Saya's bow, quieter than the rifle, but the result was not quiet. The rider on the far right, the most exposed one, moving fastest, exactly where she'd predicted a man moving fast would be, made a sound and then did not make any more sounds. Then again. Arrow. Clean, unhurried in the way of someone very good at a thing who has no need to rush it. Oren couldn't see her. This was correct. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, visible from below, only as the brief movement of draw and release. Cobb got the remaining men to the woodpile. The false breastwork, which looked like cover, had been arranged to look like cover, which meant it was where a man in a hurry would go. 3 of them went for it. The ground in front of the woodpile was soft. He and Saya had redirected water through there for 3 weeks. It looked hard. It wasn't. 2 horses went down into the mud. Not dead. Just stopped completely. Cobb did not go for the woodpile. The big man had felt something wrong in the approach and was moving along the fence line instead. Low, patient, looking for angles. Oren tracked him. He was about to take the shot when the world moved. Not an earthquake, a horse. Right behind him, from the southeast, the angle he hadn't fully covered. He dropped, rolled. The horse thundered past within 4 feet of him. The rider was already turning, bringing the pistol around. Oren was not in the position he'd been in, which was the only reason the shot missed. But now he was exposed, with 2 men coming from the south and the rider recovering, and this was the part where the plan ended and the problem began. He took the rider, moved fast toward the water trough. Cover, not good, cover, but available. Dropped behind it, then he heard Cobb's voice. From his right. Close. That's far enough, old man, he turned. Cobb was 8 feet away, pistol leveled with the steadiness of someone for whom this had become posture rather than effort. Face not angry, not triumphant, just working. Behind Cobb, the remaining men pulling up. 6, maybe 7, and Dryden. Coming at a walk because Dryden walked his horse through everything. Oren's rifle was at the wrong angle. 8 feet with a drawn pistol is not a problem you solve with a long gun. He held still. He kept doing the math, fast, because you keep doing it until the situation changes. Put it down, Cobb said. Oren put the rifle on the ground, slowly. He straightened up. Dryden arrived, pulled up 6 feet away, and looked down at Oren with those pale eyes. The satisfaction in them was not triumphant. Just the satisfaction of a calculation that had come out correct, Mr. Calloway, he said. Same voice. Always the same voice. I want the woman and I want the document. I know what you want, Oren said. Then we can resolve this quickly. We can, Oren said. But not the way you're thinking. Dryden tilted his head very slightly. The gesture of a man who is interested in what you're about to say, only in the way you're interested in what a piece of machinery does before you shut it off. And then 3 things happened in approximately the same second. Saya's voice. From the barn. Clear. Not shouting. Carrying across the yard with a precision that matched everything else she did. Dryden. Dryden turned his head, and the arrow came not at him. Past him. Within a foot of his right ear. And it took the pistol out of Cobb's hand. Not a trick shot. A calculated shot. Taken from the barn loft, from cover, at a target she had been tracking for 30 seconds, accounting for distance and angle and the specific position of Cobb's hand relative to his body. She had taken the gun, not the hand. Deliberate. Controlled. Cobb made a sound. His hand went to his chest reflexively. The pistol was on the ground, and in the second of stillness that follows unexpected things, the pause when everyone recalibrates, Oren moved. 58 years old. Bad knee. Left arm that had been giving him trouble before this started. Not fast in the way of a young man. Fast in the way of a man who has already done the calculation and knows exactly which 3 steps he needs to take. The rifle was in his hands. He turned. He put it on Dryden. Dryden looked at the rifle. He looked at Oren. Still on his horse. Still straight-backed. Still apparently composed. Whether from remarkable courage or the specific rigidity of a man who cannot process that his situations have changed. Because his situations don't change. Because he is Colonel Aldous Dryden. The remaining men had stopped. They were looking at each other. At the barn. At the 2 men in the mud in front of the woodpile, who had been there for a while and were not improving their situation. Cobb was looking at his empty hand, The men behind you, Oren said. I'd like them to lower their weapons. A beat, do it. Dryden said, without turning, the sound of weapons going down. You understand this changes nothing. Dryden said to Oren. It changes today, Oren said. Today is what I'm concerned with. There are people behind me. I know. With interests that don't disappear when I do. I know that too. Oren kept the rifle exactly where it was. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get off your horse, all of you. You're going to leave your weapons where you stand, and you're going to walk north. Dryden looked at him. Walk, he said. Walk, Oren said. 8 miles to Mallow Creek. You'll be there by evening, and me, Dryden said. Not quite a question. You, Oren said, are not walking anywhere. They disarmed in silence, one by one. The remaining men laid their weapons down and walked north. No argument, no second attempt. Because the barn was still watching them. They knew it. The man who'd had his pistol taken by an arrow from an invisible position tended to make a person thoughtful about what else might be positioned where they couldn't see it. Oren watched them go until the last one was over the ridge. Then he looked at Cobb. Cobb looked back with his flat, professional gaze. Same direction, Oren said. Something moved in Cobb's expression. Not quite respect. The thing that exists near respect in a man who doesn't use the word. He walked north. Dryden stood beside his horse. He had gotten down without being asked, which Oren noted. Still straight-backed. The composure of a man who had decided composure was the last available thing, and he was going to keep it. Oren lowered the rifle slightly, not all the way, but enough he heard Saya come out of the barn. Her footsteps, recognizable now, the specific weight and rhythm of them. She came to stand 6 feet to his left. He didn't look at her. He was watching Dryden. Dryden looked at Saya, and there it was, briefly visible. The thing that all faces do when they are in the presence of someone they have genuinely wronged, and know it, a flinch, involuntary. Incendiary, so fast it was almost not there. He knew what he'd done. He just didn't believe it was wrong. That was the thing about men like Dryden. They weren't ignorant. They had simply made a calculation that some people mattered less than certain outcomes, and had organized their entire lives around it until the calculation felt like logic. Like reality, you burned a village in 1865, Oren said. Pueblo families. Women, children. They had refused to relocate. Dryden said nothing. I reported it, you know that. You've known my name since you rode into this valley. Nothing. The report was buried. But the report still exists. I have a copy. A man in Washington has a copy. And attached to it, he paused. A legal recognition of Apache Jicarilla land rights, signed in 1868, that explicitly blocks your railroad's planned route. Both documents are already in transit. I sent them 10 days ago. Dryden looked at him. You knew I planned, Oren said. There's a difference. Silence. Even if the documents reach Washington, Dryden said, the interests behind this railroad are large, Oren said. I know. But large interests hit legal obstacles as nice as small ones. They slow down, they reroute. They find other ways. He paused. And they do not do this quietly. When there is also a journalist who has been looking for exactly this kind of case for 18 months, and has just received a very detailed letter. Something shifted in Dryden's expression. A crack in the composure, thin as a hairline. But real. The route goes around, Oren said. Your company survives. The land survives. My valley survives. And you answer for 1865. And for what happened to this woman's father. And for what you had done to her. A very long silence. You're bluffing, Dryden said. But not with conviction. I've never bluffed in my life, Oren said. Ask anyone who knew me. Dryden looked at the ground. Then up. You'll never make it stick, he said. The people behind me are going to have to decide, Oren said, whether protecting you is worth the noise. My experience with powerful people is that loyalty has a price point. You're about to find yours. Silence. Dryden very still. And then, slowly, the thing Oren had been waiting for, the thing he hadn't been certain would come, the shoulders. The specific shift of a man when what he's been holding up becomes too heavy. Not a collapse, just a change in the angle. A degree or two, but visible. "I need a horse," Dryden said. "Flat, quiet. You have one," Orrin said. "Take it. Go to Mallow Creek. Stay there. A federal agent will be there by the end of the month." Julius Garrett made certain arrangements. "You'll want to be findable when he arrives." Dryden looked at him for one last moment. Then he mounted. He rode north. He did not look back. Silence came in like a tide, after the hoofbeats faded, after the dust settled on the north approach, after the valley went back to being just a valley. Mountains, creek, cold October air, and the smell of gunpowder, mixing with the smell of sage. Orrin became aware that his left arm was wrong, not unexpectedly wrong. He'd known since approximately 20 minutes into the fight that something had happened to it, had been aware of it the way you're aware of a sound you're going to deal with when you have time. He hadn't had time. He had time. Now, he looked at the arm. The sleeve was dark. He'd been grazed. He thought, at some point near the water trough, during the period when there had been too many other things requiring attention. He registered this calmly. He started to turn, and Saya was already beside him. She had seen it before he turned. Of course she had. Her hand was on his arm, the good one, steadying, and she was already looking at the wound with the focused assessment of someone whose first language is injury. "Sit," she said. He sat down on the ground right there in the yard, because the trough was 3 steps away and 3 steps seemed ambitious. She crouched beside him, cut the sleeve. "Looked through," she said. "I thought so. You thought correctly." A pause. "You could have mentioned this earlier." "I was occupied. You were occupied for a long time. There were 15 men." She looked at him. "That look. I know how many men there were. I was there." Something shifted in his face. She caught it. She didn't comment. She cleaned the wound with water from the canteen at her belt. Her hands were very steady. They were always steady when something mattered. "The document," he said. "Safe," she indicated her jacket. "It has been safe the entire time. Good. Yes. Good." She tied off the bandage with a precision that was almost aggressive in its neatness. "You should have told me about the letter to Garrett before you sent it. I was going to." "You waited until it was done." "I wanted to be sure it had been sent before I discussed it. That is not how 2 people plan together." He held her gaze. "You're right," he said. "It isn't." She tied the last knot, looked at him the way she always did when she had decided something was finished being argued about. "Next time," she said. "Next time," he agreed. She stood, offered her hand. He took it and got to his feet, which required more from both of them than it would have 6 hours earlier. "The men in the mud," he said, "gone while you were talking to Dryden." "I watched them go. Efficient," he breathed. Then he went to help her with the horses. They spent the afternoon in the quiet work of aftermath. Not dramatic, just work, horses, the barn, equipment from the mud. The false breastwork dispersed back into being just a woodpile, because it had served its purpose, and he didn't want to look at it anymore. They worked without much talking, each of them occupying their part of the shared silence, without asking the other to fill it up. At dusk she built the fire, a different fire than the hearth fire. Outside, in the yard, using an arrangement of stones and materials she'd been collecting from the surrounding land over the past 3 weeks. Materials gathered in the moments between other work, without explanation. She built it in the Apache way. He didn't know the details of it, the specific meaning of each element, the order of things. He didn't ask. He understood that some things are explained when the person who holds them decides to explain them, and that asking before then is a kind of intrusion. He brought wood when she indicated she needed more. He stepped back when she indicated she needed space. He watched. She sang loudly. It wasn't that kind of song. Close and low and private in a way that was somehow not diminished by the fact that he could hear it. It moved in a pattern he couldn't follow, but could feel. The way you feel music in a language you don't speak. the emotion reaching you without the specific words, the grief and the endurance and the long, complicated love of it moving through the air. She was singing to Chaitan. He understood that. He stood back. He was not separate from this moment, not outside it. She had chosen to do this here, in this yard, with him present. That was its own form of inclusion, its own statement about what this place had become for both of them. He was a witness, not an audience. The difference mattered. The fire burned. The mountains went dark. The first stars appeared. She sang until she was finished, and then she stopped, and the silence after had the texture of something completed, something that had needed doing and had been done. And the world was slightly lighter for it. She turned. He was there. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying. They were both people who understood that the moments when nothing needs saying are the most honest ones after a while. She sat down on the step. He sat beside her, not close, just beside. Above them the stars were doing their slow, ancient work. The fire settled into embers. He would have liked this place, she said. Your father? Yes. She looked at the mountains. He would have said the mountains here were different from ours, but the same kind of different. He said that about many things, that things could be different and still be the same kind. Oren thought about this. He sounds like someone who paid attention to what things had in common, he said. He paid attention to what was true, she said. He said the same thing about people. That people could be very different and still be the same kind. She didn't look at him. When she said this, he didn't look at her, but they were both aware of what was being said and what it meant. I think he was right, Oren said. She nodded once, slowly. Later, inside, the hearth fire going, 2 cups of coffee on the table, she reached into her jacket and put the document between them. I've been thinking, she said. About? The copy you sent to Garrett and the original. She touched the edge of the document. If Garrett can use the copy to begin legal proceedings, the original becomes something else. Not evidence. Record. She paused. There is a lawyer in Santa Fe, a man my father corresponded with in 1867, before the agreement was formalized. His name is Alderman, the same man who arranged the document. He is still there. I believe he would know what to do with the original, where to keep it, how to make it permanent. Santa Fe, he said. 4 days' ride. He looked at her. You want to go? I need to go, she said. There is difference. Not always, he said. Something shifted in her expression. No, she agreed. Not always. He drank his coffee, looked at the table. Then at her. 4 days, he said. Each way, 8 total, approximately. The cattle will need. He stopped. He was doing the practical calculation, which is what he did when he was thinking about something else. She knew this. He could see that she knew it. He put the cup down. When do you want to leave? He said. She looked at him with that quality of acknowledging that something has happened that needed to happen. 2 days, she said. Your arm needs 2 days. My arm is fine. Your arm needs 2 days, she said again. He didn't argue. 2 days, he said. In the morning he went to the graves. He did this every morning. But this morning was different from every other morning in a way that was hard to articulate. Except that the morning after something is not the same as the morning before it, and the morning after a battle that didn't kill you has its own specific quality, a kind of startled gratitude that the world is still there and you are still in it. He stood in front of Clara's marker, then Eli's, the cedar markers he'd made himself. 4 years of desert seasons, and they were holding up better than he'd expected, which seemed right. He was quiet for a while. Then he talked. He told Clara about the last 3 weeks, the preparation, the work, the specific quality of working alongside someone who worked the way Saya worked, with full attention, without complaint, with a kind of professional respect that left no room for anything other than what needed to be done. He told her about the hawk feather. He told her about Julius Garrett, and the journalist, and the plan that had run parallel to the fighting. He told her he'd read Eli's letter. He stopped there for a moment. I should have read it a long time ago, he said. I know that. I know you'd have told me that. He looked at the marker. He was right. About what I told him. I just forgot it for a while. He moved to Eli's marker. The fight's over, he said. For now. For this part of it. There'll be more. That's how these things work. They don't end cleanly. But the document is going somewhere and the right people know what happened, and that's not nothing. He put his hand on the marker. You would have liked her. She doesn't waste words. You'd have respected that. He stepped back. The morning was cold and very clear. The kind of clear that comes after the first hard night of real autumn, when the air loses its ambiguity and becomes exactly what it is. The mountains were visible all the way to their highest ridges, every detail sharp. He heard footsteps behind him. He knew them. Saya came to stand beside him. Not close, just beside. She had 2 cups of coffee, the morning coffee she made better than he did, which he had stopped pretending not to notice. She offered him one. He took it. She looked at the markers. He let her look. Clara, he said, indicating. Eli, she said both names, carefully. The way she said names that mattered, Eli wrote me a letter, Oren said. Before his last battle. I read it 2 weeks ago. She waited. He said, I taught him that a real man isn't someone who doesn't get scared. He's someone who gets scared and goes to the right place anyway. She was quiet. I'd forgotten that, Oren said. I forgot it for about 4 years. He looked at the markers, he reminded me. She looked at him, then she looked at the markers again. Your wife, she said. She grew things in the winter. Yes, he said. You said you stopped. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the windowsill in the south window gets the most light. He looked at her. For growing things, she said. If someone were going to start again, he looked at the cabin, at the south window, at the plain wooden sill. When we get back from Santa Fe, he said. She nodded once. When we get back, she agreed. 2 days later, they left before dawn. The valley was still dark. The horse's breath made small clouds. The stars were up, the early ones, holding on, reluctant to give way to what was coming behind the mountains. Oren had done what needed doing before the trip. Left instructions with a man at the feed store in Mallow Creek who would check on the property, arranged the cattle as best he could, secured the cabin. He had also written a second letter to Julius Garrett the evening before, updating him, telling him Dryden had been sent north, giving the timeline and the Santa Fe plan, telling him what he needed in Mallow Creek by end of month. This letter he had shown Saya before sealing it. She read it. She made one change, a specific detail about the land boundaries that he'd approximated, and she knew precisely. He corrected it. He sealed it. She looked at him. Better, she said. Yes, he said. Better. They rode south as the light came, side by side. Not urgent, not leisurely. The pace of 2 people with a specific destination and a reasonable sense of how long it would take. The mesa country opened ahead. Red rock and sage, and the particular sky of the southwest, already going blue in the east. A blue so saturated it looked intentional, as though someone had decided this specific shade was the one this part of the world deserved. They didn't talk much in the early miles. They had learned, over weeks, that their silences were not the same as absence. They were shared space, the silence of a room occupied by 2 people, who are both doing different things, and yet the room is inhabited rather than empty. After a few miles, she said, he will fight the legal proceedings. Dryden? The people behind him? Yes, Oren said. They will. It could take years, probably will. Years of what kind of work? He looked at her sideways, the kind with letters and filings, and going to places and talking to the right people. And, he paused, patience. Mostly patience. She nodded. My father was patient, she said. I know. I have been told I did not inherit this quality. He looked at her. She was looking ahead at the trail. Who told you that? He said. My father, she said. He looked back at the trail ahead of him, after a moment. I've been told the same thing. She looked at him. He looked back. And this time the thing that moved between them was not a question or a statement. It was something quieter. The specific recognition of two people who have, through some improbable sequence of events, have found themselves in the same difficulty and are going to have to work through it together, and have both arrived, separately and simultaneously, at the understanding that this is acceptable. More than acceptable. He looked back at the trail. She looked back at the trail. They rode. The mountains fell behind them. The country opened into the broader landscape of the Southern Territory, red and gold and enormous in every direction. The kind of landscape that makes you understand, without requiring you to say it, that you are very small and the world is very large. And this is simply what is true. Oren rode and thought about the windowsill, about what might grow there in the winter light of the south window if someone paid attention. Clara had grown herbs mostly, things useful for cooking, things with a smell. He had never paid close attention to which ones, which he now regretted. He could ask. He could go to the feed store in Mallow Creek and ask what grew well in pots in winter. And this would not be a strange question. People asked it. There was nothing unusual about it at all. He would ask. When they got back, he would ask. He would plant something in the south window. Something green. Something that grew without requiring the world to cooperate. Something that simply grew because it was its nature to grow. Because growth was what it did in the absence of instruction otherwise. Saya was thinking too. He could see it in her. The quality of internal focus that sat differently than simple quiet. After a while she said, "My father used to say that the most important things are the things you choose to carry." He waited. "Not the things that happen to you," she said. "The things you pick up and decide to bring. Because those are the things that say who you are." She paused. He said, "Grief was something you carry, and love was something you carry, and memory was something you carry. But how you carry them?" That was the choice. Oren thought about this. He thought about a cedar box on a shelf, about an unopened letter, about 10 years of choosing to carry something sealed rather than open. He was a wise man, he said. He was frequently annoying, she said, and almost always right. Which made it worse. Oren looked at her. She was looking ahead, but there was something in her face, that warmth, that specific undertone of it that he'd learned to look for. Clara was the same way, he said. "I know." She said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "I read enough of her journal to understand," she said. He looked back at the trail. "You read more than 2 pages, he said. A pause. "Possibly," she said. He said nothing. She would not have minded, she said. "I believe," he thought about Clara, about her laugh, about the specific quality of her attention, warm and total and never making you feel examined, only seen. "No," he said. She wouldn't have minded. They rode on. The sun climbed. The mountains behind them got smaller and then disappeared entirely. Ahead was the long reach of the territory, red and open and full of the specific kind of promise that open country has always had. The promise that says, there is more past where you can see, and some of it is what you're looking for. The trail south was clear. Santa Fe was 4 days. After Santa Fe, there was the road back, and after the road back, there was a cabin in a valley with a cedar shelf and 2 graves in the good eastern light, and a windowsill in the south window that was waiting to have something growing in it. Oren rode. Saya rode beside him. The world was enormous and hard, and not particularly interested in fairness, and had given both of them more than their share of the kind of things you don't ask for and can't return. It had also, in its improbable and sideways fashion, done this, put them in the same place at the same time, on the same road, going the same direction. Which was not, when you thought about it, nothing. It was, in fact, exactly something. He didn't look back. He had spent 4 years looking back. He was done with that now. The cabin sat quiet in the valley behind them. 2 windows, 1 door, a hearth that drew well in dry weather, a shelf of books with soft spines, a cedar box, 2 chairs at a table, 2 chairs, The south window caught the afternoon light the way it always had. The windowsill bare and wooden and waiting. The way things wait when they don't know they're waiting. But they are, the graves in the good eastern soil. The markers holding up, season after season, better than expected. The hawk feather on the shelf. The diagram of the property still on the table, with two different kinds of handwriting on it. One, in pencil, practical and direct, and one in a different hand entirely. Mapping things the pencil hadn't known how to find. The cabin would hold all of this until they came back. It was good at holding things. It had been doing it for 4 years. It could manage a few more days.